The ashes of Meridian Prime. The emergency beacon cut through the darkness of space like a scream. Captain Elena Vasquez was reviewing supply manifests when the signal reached her vessel, the reconnaissance ship Pathfinder. The transmission was fragmentary, broken by static and interference, but the words that came through made her blood run cold. Meridian Prime, under attack. They're not stopping. Entire cities. Please, someone. Then nothing but the hollow silence of dead space. Elena's hands moved across her console with practiced efficiency. Navigation, plot a jump to Meridian Prime. Communications, try to raise the colony on all frequencies. Everyone else, battle stations. Her crew moved without hesitation, though she could see the worry in their eyes. Meridian Prime was not some remote outpost. It was a jewel of human expansion, home to 6.8 million people. Families, children, scientists, artists, people building a future among the stars. The jump through faster than light space took 8 hours. 8 hours of silence from Meridian Prime. 8 hours of Elena staring at the view screen, hoping against hope that they would arrive to find some reasonable explanation. A communications malfunction, a solar flare, anything but what her instincts told her they would find. When the Pathfinder dropped back into normal space at the edge of the Meridian system, the sensors immediately began screaming warnings. Radiation levels were catastrophic. Elena felt her heart sink into her stomach as the computer compiled the data. "Get me visuals," she ordered, her voice barely above a whisper. The main view screen flickered to life and the bridge fell into absolute silence. Meridian Prime had been a green and blue world, carefully terraformed over 70 years to support human life. Now it glowed with a sickly orange light. The atmosphere was choked with ash and radioactive particles. Where cities had stood, there were only impact craters kilometers wide. The orbital stations were debris. The defensive satellites were shattered metal floating in the black. "Sweet mercy," breathed her first officer, Commander James Torres. "The entire planet—" Elena forced herself to breathe, to think, to act like a captain instead of a human being witnessing hell. "Launch probe clusters. I want full spectrum analysis of every weapon signature, every energy residue, every piece of evidence we can find. Deploy search and rescue drones to scan for survivors." Even as she gave the orders, she knew they would find no one alive. No one could survive what had been done to this world. The forensic drones worked for 4 days. 4 days of Elena and her crew watching the data come in, each report worse than the last. The bombardment had lasted 9 hours. Every population center had been systematically targeted. The weapons used were military grade, designed not just to destroy but to ensure complete annihilation. Thermal imaging showed that ground temperatures had reached levels that vaporized organic matter instantly. There were no bodies to recover, no remains to send home to grieving families. Just ash and melted stone and the echoes of 6.8 million voices silenced forever. But the weapon signatures told a story. A story written in radiation patterns and energy dispersal analysis. "Captain," her science officer reported, her voice shaking. "The weapons match Crithian military specifications. Multiple warships, probably a battle group of at least 40 vessels. The bombardment pattern suggests they took their time, making sure nothing survived." Elena closed her eyes. The Crithian Dominion. Not pirates, not some unknown hostile force, but one of the founding members of the Galactic Concordat, the alliance that had promised peace among the stars. 250 years ago, when humanity had finally developed faster than light travel and ventured beyond their solar system, they had discovered something extraordinary. The galaxy was teeming with intelligent life. Thousands of species, millions of worlds, all connected through the Galactic Concordat. The Concordat was not a government, but rather a framework for cooperation, a set of agreements that allowed different species to coexist without constant warfare. And the Concordat had only one absolute law, one rule that every member species swore to uphold: no genocide, no extinction. No matter the conflict, no matter the reason, no species could attempt to exterminate another sentient race. This law was sacred, enforced by the combined might of every member species. Break this law and the entire galaxy would turn against you. That was the promise. That was the foundation of 2.5 centuries of relative peace. Elena transmitted her findings back to Earth, then began the long journey home. She did not sleep during that voyage. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Meridian Prime as it had been. Green parks, Bustling markets. Schools full of laughing children, all gone. All murdered. The news reached Earth before the Pathfinder did. By the time Elena's ship entered orbit, humanity already knew what had happened. She had never seen Earth so quiet, so focused. There was no panic, no chaos. Instead, there was something far more frightening. Cold, calculated fury. Elena was summoned directly to the Global Assembly, the governing body that represented all of Earth and its colonies. She stood before the representatives of billions of humans and presented her evidence. Holographic displays showed the destruction. Energy signatures proved Crithian involvement. Timeline analysis demonstrated that Meridian Prime had never fired a shot in defense, had not even raised planetary shields until the first bombardment began. This had not been a battle. It had been an execution. "The law is clear," said Ambassador David Chen, Earth's representative to the Galactic Concordat. He was a career diplomat, a man who had spent 40 years building bridges between humanity and alien species. Now his face was carved from stone, his voice steady but filled with barely contained rage. "The Crithian Dominion has committed genocide. They have murdered nearly 7 million human beings. The Concordat's law demands justice." Within 72 hours, Ambassador Chen stood before the Grand Assembly of the Galactic Concordat. The assembly chamber was a marvel of engineering, a space station designed to accommodate thousands of different species. Representatives floated in tanks of liquid, perched on crystalline structures, or stood on platforms adjusted for their gravity requirements. Chen had always been awed by this place, this symbol of unity among the stars. Today, he felt only contempt. He presented the evidence methodically, professionally. Satellite footage recovered from dying orbital platforms showed the Crithian fleet arriving in formation. Energy analysis proved beyond doubt which species had fired the weapons. Biological scans confirmed that every human on Meridian Prime had been killed. 6.8 million souls erased from existence. "The law of the Concordat is absolute," Chen said, his words translated into thousands of languages simultaneously. "Genocide cannot be tolerated. We demand that the Crithian Dominion be held accountable. We demand their leadership stand trial. We demand justice for our dead." The Crithian representative, a being called High Commander Vexthar, rose to respond. His species were tall and reptilian, covered in dark scales that shimmered under the chamber's lights. "The humans lie," he hissed. "Meridian Prime was building weapons in violation of territory agreements. They were preparing to attack our nearest colonies. We acted in self-defense, as is our right." Chen played more evidence. Communications logs showing Meridian Prime had been a civilian colony with minimal defenses. Trade records proving they had been exporting art and agricultural products, not weapons. Testimony from neutral species who had visited the colony and found only peaceful settlements. All lies, the evidence proved. Meridian Prime had been innocent, and the Crithians had killed them anyway, but the Assembly did not act. Instead, they debated. They formed investigative committees. They suggested appointing special mediators. The Zarkoth Collective, longtime allies of the Crithians, proposed that humanity accept monetary compensation instead of criminal prosecution. The Vril Consortium recommended a joint inquiry that would take years to complete. Chen watched this circus for 10 days. 10 days of speeches and procedures and diplomatic double-talk. 10 days while the ashes of Meridian Prime grew colder. He saw the truth with terrible clarity. The Concordat would not enforce its own law. They would discuss and delay and ultimately do nothing, because enforcing the law against a powerful member like the Crithian Dominion might upset the delicate political balance. On the 11th day, Chen requested the floor during a procedural session. The Assembly Speaker recognized him with obvious reluctance. 250 years ago, Chen began, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. "Humanity joined the Galactic Concordat because you made us a promise. You told us there was one law that protected every species from the nightmare of extinction. You said that if anyone broke this law, the full weight of the Concordat would fall upon them. You promised us that genocide would never be tolerated." He paused, looking around at the thousands of alien representatives. "The Crithian Dominion broke that law. They murdered nearly 7 million humans, and you will not act. You hide behind committees and investigations and political considerations. You have shown us that your promise was worthless." The chamber erupted in protests. The speaker demanded he follow proper procedure. Several representatives began shouting in their various languages, Chen ignored them all. Effective immediately. Humanity withdraws from the Galactic Concordat, he announced. We will enforce the law ourselves since you lack the courage to do so. And when we are finished, you can decide whether you want us back. He walked out. Behind him, the assembly dissolved into chaos. Some species demanded humanity be sanctioned. Others argued for reconciliation. A few quietly began reassessing their own relationships with the Crethian Dominion. The news reached every human world within hours. Earth, Mars, the colonies on Europa and Titan, the distant settlements on worlds dozens of light years away. Everywhere humans lived, the response was immediate and unanimous. The galaxy had failed them. They would answer alone. Admiral Rebecca Stone had retired from active military service 12 years earlier, after a distinguished career spanning 4 decades. She was teaching military history at the academy when the call came. She listened to the report about Meridian Prime in silence, her weathered face showing no emotion. Then she stood, found her old uniform in the back of her closet, and made a single call to her former commanding officer. I'm coming back, she said simply, and I'm going to need a fleet. Across human space, the same scene repeated itself millions of times. Veterans emerged from retirement. Reserve units activated. Civilian pilots volunteered for military service. Shipyards that had been building cargo vessels and colony ships retooled for warship production. Mining operations began processing ore for armor plating and weapons. Research facilities shifted focus to military applications. The galaxy thought humanity would negotiate. They expected angry words, perhaps a limited military action, and then a return to the diplomatic table. They believed humans would be reasonable, would accept some compromise, would eventually calm down and move on. They had no idea what was coming. Within 3 months, humanity had assembled the largest military force in their history, 800 warships of various classes, from nimble destroyers to massive dreadnoughts, 50,000 Marines trained for boarding actions, support vessels carrying enough ammunition and supplies for a prolonged campaign, and every single person involved had volunteered, knowing they might never come home. Admiral Stone stood on the bridge of her flagship, the dreadnought Retribution, and looked at the tactical display showing her assembled fleet. It was not the largest fleet in the galaxy. The Crethian Dominion alone commanded more than 5,000 warships. But Stone knew something the Crethians did not. Humans had never stopped preparing for war. While other species assumed the Concordat would protect them, humanity remembered their own bloody history. They remembered world wars and genocides and near extinctions. They had built their ships with redundant systems and manual overrides, designed by engineers who assumed everything would break down at the worst possible moment. They had trained their soldiers for brutal close combat, not the sanitized warfare most species practiced. They had stockpiled weapons and ammunition because they knew peace was always temporary. And now, after Meridian Prime, every human in the fleet carried something else. A burning need for justice that transcended orders or duty. They were not fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting because nearly 7 million of their people had been murdered, and the galaxy had shrugged. Stone composed a message and transmitted it directly to the Crethian homeworld, bypassing diplomatic channels. The message was brief and translated into their language with perfect clarity. You have 72 hours to surrender your leadership for trial, dismantle your military, and submit to occupation. This is your only warning. Refuse, and we will enforce the law ourselves. On the Crethian homeworld, High Commander Vexithar received the message and laughed. His advisors laughed with him. The idea that humanity, with its tiny fleet, could threaten the mighty Crethian Dominion was absurd. Humans were barely colonizing their local cluster when the Crethians had already conquered 73 star systems. Vexithar sent his own message back, dripping with contempt. Come and try, primates. We will add your worlds to our empire. He ordered the Grand Fleet to assemble at the border, 5,000 warships ready to crush this insolent species once and for all. They would burn Earth itself if necessary, teach humanity a lesson about challenging their betters. As the Crethian fleet gathered, Admiral Stone smiled for the first time since learning about Meridian Prime. All ships, she transmitted to her fleet. Execute Operation Retribution. Show them what happens when you break the only law that matters. The human fleet jumped to faster than light speed, and the galaxy would never be the same. The price of broken promises. 3 months had passed since Ambassador Chen walked out of the Grand Assembly. 3 months since humanity had withdrawn from the Galactic Concordat and begun the greatest military mobilization in their history. The galaxy watched with a mixture of curiosity and concern as human shipyards worked around the clock, as factories converted to wartime production, as millions of volunteers joined the cause. Most species still believed this was posturing. Surely humanity would negotiate. Surely they understood that challenging the Krithian dominion was suicide. The Krithians commanded 5,000 warships, had conquered 73 systems, and had been a spacefaring civilization for 12,000 years. Humanity had been among the stars for barely 3 centuries. Admiral Rebecca Stone stood on the bridge of the Retribution and studied the tactical display with the calm focus of someone who had spent 40 years preparing for this moment. Her fleet of 800 ships was assembled in the Threshold Nebula, a region of dense stellar matter on the border between human and Krithian space. Intelligence reports confirmed that the Krithian Grand Fleet was approaching, confident and eager to crush this upstart species. "Status report," Stone commanded, her voice cutting through the quiet tension on the bridge. "All ships report ready, Admiral," her tactical officer replied. "Weapons charged, shields at maximum, defensive systems deployed. The Krithians will arrive in approximately 40 minutes. Stone nodded slowly. 40 minutes until the largest battle humanity had ever fought. 40 minutes until they proved whether justice still meant something in this galaxy. She thought of Meridian Prime, of the 6.8 million people who had died screaming. She thought of the children who would never grow up, the families destroyed, the futures stolen. And she felt no doubt about what they were about to do. "All ships, this is Admiral Stone," she transmitted across the fleet. "In a few minutes we will face an enemy that believes we are weak. They think our technology is inferior, our tactics predictable, our resolve questionable. They think we will break and run when we see the size of their fleet." She paused, letting her words sink in. "They murdered nearly 7 million of our people and expected the galaxy to do nothing. They were right about the galaxy, but they were wrong about us." Across 800 ships, thousands of crew members listened in silence. "We are not here to send a message," Stone continued. "We are not here to negotiate or to make a point. We are here to enforce the only law that matters. No species has the right to exterminate another. The Concordat failed to uphold that law, so we will uphold it ourselves, no matter the cost. Today, the Krithian Dominion learns what happens when you break a promise to humanity." The fleet channel erupted in acknowledgments. Stone could hear the determination in every voice. These were not soldiers fighting for glory or conquest. They were people demanding justice for the dead. The Krithian Grand Fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. 5,000 warships, from nimble corvettes to massive battleships 3 kilometers long. It was a sight designed to inspire terror, a demonstration of overwhelming force. High Commander Vexthar watched from his flagship, the massive dreadnought, inevitable victory, and felt satisfaction at the sight of the tiny human fleet ahead. 800 ships, his tactical officer reported with poorly concealed amusement. They actually came. Vexthar's scaled face twisted into what his species considered a smile. "Open a channel. Let me speak to whoever commands this pathetic force." The communication was established, and Admiral Stone's face appeared on the view screen. Vexthar studied her with cold reptilian eyes. She looked old for a human, her hair gray, her face lined with years. She looked tired, weak. "I am High Commander Vexthar of the Krithian Dominion," he announced. "You have one opportunity to surrender and retreat. Return to your worlds, accept our dominance, and we will be merciful. Refuse, and we will erase humanity as we erased your colony." Stone met his gaze without flinching. "I am Admiral Rebecca Stone of the Human Defense Fleet. You murdered 6.8 million civilians. You broke the sacred law of the Concordat. You are guilty of genocide. Surrender now for trial, or we will take you by force." Vexthar laughed, a harsh hissing sound. "With 800 ships against my 5,000? Your species is even more foolish than I thought. Very well, primate. Die with your pride." He cut the transmission and turned to his weapons officer. "Advance in standard formation. Destroy them all." The Krithian fleet began moving forward in textbook battle formation, spreading out to envelop the smaller human force. It was a maneuver they had used successfully for thousands of years, overwhelming enemies with superior numbers and firepower. Return fire, Vexthar roared. Find those mines and destroy them. But there was nothing to target. The mines were small, moved unpredictably, and there were thousands of them scattered across millions of cubic kilometers. The Crithian fleet tried to push through, accepting losses to reach the human ships beyond. They still had overwhelming numbers. They could still win this. Then the second phase of the trap activated. What the Crithians had thought were asteroids drifting through the nebula revealed themselves to be weapons platforms. Automated defense stations opened fire with missiles and energy weapons, targeting the now disrupted Crithian formation. Gravity well generators activated, preventing ships from jumping back to faster-than-light speed. The entire region had been transformed into a killing ground, and the Crithian fleet was caught in the center. Brilliant, breathed Stone's tactical officer as he watched the battle unfold. They walked right into it. Stone did not celebrate. Launch all fighters. Activate hunter-killer drone swarms. All capital ships advance and engage at optimal range. Target their command vessels first. The human fleet surged forward, and the Crithians finally saw what they were truly facing. Human warships were not elegant or beautiful like those of older civilizations. They were brutal and functional, covered in armor plating and bristling with weapons. Every ship had been designed by engineers who assumed it would take damage, who planned for systems to fail, who built redundancy into every critical function. The fighting was savage. Human missiles, smaller but far more maneuverable than Crithian weapons, swarmed enemy ships in clusters. Fighter craft darted through the chaos, targeting engines and weapons systems. Drone swarms, thousands of small autonomous units, overwhelmed Crithian point defenses through sheer numbers. And when human ships took damage, they kept fighting. A destroyer with half its hull breached continued firing until its reactor failed. A cruiser that lost engine power used maneuvering thrusters to ram a Crithian battleship. Boarding pods launched from damaged vessels. Marines in combat armor cutting their way into enemy ships to sabotage them from within. Vexthar watched his tactical display with growing horror. His fleet had superior numbers and firepower, but the humans were not fighting like any civilized species. They used tactics that other races considered insane. Ships would intentionally overload their reactors to create massive explosions when enemies got too close. Captains would vent their own atmosphere to extinguish fires, then continue fighting in vacuum. Damaged vessels would set collision courses with enemy ships rather than retreat. They fight like animals, his tactical officer said, fear creeping into his voice. They have no sense of self-preservation, but that was not quite true. The humans were not mindless. Their tactics were calculated, brutal, and terrifyingly effective. They had studied Crithian military doctrine and designed specific counters. They exploited every weakness, and they never ever stopped coming. The battle raged for 18 hours. The Crithian fleet, expecting an easy victory, found itself locked in a grinding war of attrition against an enemy that refused to break. Human losses were heavy. Nearly 200 ships were destroyed or crippled. Thousands of crew members died in the vacuum of space or burning corridors. But the Crithian losses were catastrophic. By the time High Commander Vexthar finally accepted reality, 3,800 of his 5,000 ships were destroyed or disabled. The survivors were scattered, their formation broken, their morale shattered. Retreat, Vexthar ordered, his voice hollow. All ships, emergency jump. Return to home territory. The remaining Crithian vessels activated their faster-than-light drives and fled in panic, jumping to any system that might offer safety. Admiral Stone watched them go and felt no satisfaction, only grim determination. All ships capable of pursuit follow them, she ordered. We are not done. What followed shocked the galaxy. In civilized warfare, when an enemy retreated, you allowed them to go. You negotiated a ceasefire. You showed mercy to the defeated. These were the rules every species understood and followed. Humanity followed none of them. The human fleet pursued the fleeing Crithians across the border and deep into their own territory. Every time a damaged Crithian ship stopped to make repairs, human vessels appeared and destroyed it. Crithian colonies watched in disbelief as their military fled past them, with humanity in relentless pursuit. When a Crithian corvette attempted to surrender using all proper protocols, powering down weapons and shields, broadcasting submission in multiple languages, Captain Elena Vasquez of the Pathfinder received the transmission. Her communications officer looked at her with uncertainty. Captain, they are surrendering. Protocol requires we accept. Elena remembered standing on the bridge of her ship, staring at the ruins of Meridian Prime. She remembered the forensic data showing how the Crithians had taken 9 hours to ensure every human was dead. She remembered that no one from Meridian Prime had been given the chance to surrender. "The law is absolute," she said quietly. "So is our response. Continue firing. The Corvette was destroyed. No survivors." News of humanity's campaign spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The Galactic Concordat convened an emergency session. Some species demanded they intervene to stop humanity. The Vril Consortium proposed sending peacekeepers. The Zarkoth Collective threatened economic sanctions, but other voices pointed out the uncomfortable truth. Humanity was enforcing the Concordat's own law, the law the Assembly had refused to uphold. The law that said genocide could not be tolerated. How could they condemn humanity for doing what the Concordat should have done? The debate paralyzed the Assembly for weeks. Meanwhile, 3 other species quietly began arresting Crithian officials within their territories. They did not want humanity coming for them next. The human fleet pushed deeper into Crithian space with methodical efficiency. They did not target civilian populations or destroy cities. Hospitals, schools, and residential areas were left untouched. But every military installation was obliterated. Every shipyard was reduced to debris. Every government building was vaporized. Command centers were systematically destroyed. The Crithian military, which had seemed so powerful, crumbled. Their defenses were designed for conventional warfare between civilized species, species that followed rules, that worried about casualties, that retreated when the odds turned against them. Humans did none of these things. They accepted losses that would make any other species surrender and kept advancing. Intercepted Crithian communications showed the growing terror among their military leadership. They had never fought an enemy like this. An enemy that treated every engagement as if it were their last stand. An enemy that did not stop, did not negotiate, did not show mercy. One Crithian general, shortly before his base was destroyed, sent a message that would become infamous across the galaxy. They are not warriors. They are a force of nature. You cannot reason with them, cannot frighten them, cannot make them stop. We should never have touched their world. 4 months after the Battle of Threshold Nebula, the human fleet arrived at the Crithian homeworld. The planet was heavily defended with orbital fortresses, planetary shields, and the last remnants of their military. But the Crithian leadership knew they had lost. Their empire was broken, their fleet was scattered, and humanity had proven they would not stop until justice was served. Admiral Stone broadcast a message on all frequencies. High Commander Vexthar and the Crithian High Council, you are guilty of genocide under the law of the Galactic Concordat. You have 1 hour to surrender yourselves for trial. Refuse, and we will come down and get you. 58 minutes later, Vexthar and 17 members of the High Council were transported aboard the Retribution in restraints. They would stand trial, not in some distant assembly chamber, but on Earth itself. Humanity would judge those who had murdered their people. The occupation of the Crithian homeworld was brief but absolute. Human forces dismantled their military infrastructure, seized government records documenting other crimes, and established a temporary administration. Within 6 weeks they withdrew, leaving the Crithian people to rebuild under new leadership that had not participated in the genocide. The trials on Earth lasted 3 months and were broadcast across the galaxy. The evidence was overwhelming. Vexthar and his co-conspirators were found guilty of crimes against sentient life. They were executed according to human law. Their bodies returned to their homeworld for burial. And then humanity sent a message to the Galactic Concordat. Admiral Stone herself delivered it, standing in the same assembly chamber where Ambassador Chen had announced humanity's withdrawal. We have enforced the law, she said simply. The species responsible for genocide has been held accountable. Their leadership has faced justice. We did what the Concordat promised to do but failed to accomplish. She looked around at the thousands of alien representatives, many of whom could not meet her gaze. Humanity is willing to rejoin the Concordat, but only under new terms. The law against genocide must be enforced absolutely and immediately. No more committees. No more delays. No more political considerations. Break the law and the consequences will be swift and total. We have shown you what enforcement looks like. The question is whether you have the courage to maintain it. The assembly debated for 2 weeks. Some species argued humanity had been too brutal, too unforgiving. Others pointed out that the law had been enforced, that genocide had been punished, that the Concordate's credibility had been restored through humanity's actions. In the end, the reforms passed. The law against genocide was strengthened, enforcement mechanisms were established, and humanity was invited to return to the Concordate, not as junior members but as equals who had proven their commitment to justice. The galaxy had learned something important. Humanity could be reasoned with, could be diplomatic, could be peaceful, but break the only law that truly mattered, and they would become something else entirely, something relentless and unforgiving, something that remembered its own bloody history and refused to let that history repeat. On Earth, a memorial was built for the 6.8 million souls lost on Meridian Prime. Admiral Stone attended the dedication ceremony, now retired for the second time. As she stood before the wall of names, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what they had done. The lives lost in the campaign, the brutality of their methods, the fear they had inspired across the galaxy. But she also knew it had been necessary. Justice had been served. The law had been enforced. And every species now understood that humanity would never again stand by while genocide occurred. Captain Elena Vasquez, promoted to admiral and given command of the rebuilt Meridian System's defenses, summed it up best in an interview years later. "We are not a violent species by nature," she said. "We prefer peace, cooperation, and diplomacy. But we remember our history. We remember what happens when genocide goes unpunished, when evil is allowed to flourish, when good people do nothing. The galaxy learned that we will exhaust every peaceful option first. But if you break the only law that protects us all from extinction, if you murder millions and expect no consequences, then you will discover what humans become when justice is denied. We become inevitable." The Crithian Empire never fully recovered. Their remaining colonies gained independence. Their military was permanently reduced. But they were allowed to survive, to rebuild, to join the community of species again under new leadership, because humanity had not sought extinction in return. They had sought justice. And once that justice was achieved, they had stopped. The galaxy understood the difference. Humanity would enforce the law, but they would not become the monsters they had fought against. In the decades that followed, no species violated the genocide law. The memory of what had happened to the Crithian Dominion was too fresh, too terrifying. When conflicts arose, they were settled through negotiation or limited warfare. The absolute line was never crossed again, and humanity, having proven what they were capable of when pushed too far, returned to being explorers, traders, artists, and scientists. They built new colonies, established peaceful relations, and contributed to galactic civilization. But every species remembered what lay beneath that civilized surface. The capacity for absolute determination, the refusal to accept injustice, the promise that breaking the only law that mattered would bring down fire and fury, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Meridian Prime Memorial remained a destination for visitors from thousands of worlds. Alien species came to see the Wall of Names, to understand what humanity had lost and what they had done in response. It served as a reminder of a simple truth that now echoed across the stars. Break the only law. Face humanity's justice. There would be no second chances. No political considerations. No mercy for those who showed none. The galaxy had trembled when humanity demanded blood. And in demanding it, humanity had ensured that such demands would never need to be made again. The law was absolute. And now finally, so was its enforcement.